Hello and welcome to the What's the Story podcast. I'm Jarlath Kyan.
And I'm Victoria Houston. Each week we'll be focusing on the stories that matter to you. Stories about the people and places that make Tyrone so special.
The What's the Story podcast is brought to you by the Northwest News Group, who also print our much-loved newspapers, the Ulster Herald, Strabane Chronicle and the Tyrone Herald. Enjoy the show.
The purpose of my inquiry is to determine whether there were steps which could reasonably have been taken by the United Kingdom state authorities to prevent the bombing.
That was Lord Alan Turnbull, the chair of the Omagh Bombing Inquiry, speaking at the opening of the inquiry in February 2024. The independent inquiry had been set up a year earlier by the British government after years of campaigning from the families of the 31 people killed on August 15, 1998, when a Real IRA car bomb exploded in the middle of Omagh. No one has ever been convicted by a criminal court of carrying out the murders. While acknowledging where the blame lies for the atrocity, Lord Turnbull has stressed it is not the role of the inquiry to establish who carried out the attack.
The responsibility for all that occurred on the day lies squarely with those terrorists who made, transported and planted the bomb. It is not my role to determine who those individuals were, and a statutory inquiry does not have the power to determine any individual person's criminal liability. It is, however, my role to establish the truth of whether the terrible events of 15th August 1998 could have been prevented.
Earlier this year, relatives of those killed in the bombing and those injured in the attack got the opportunity to tell their stories at the first evidence hearings at the inquiry. For many of those who spoke during the hearings at the Strual Arts Centre, it was the first time they had told their story. The inquiry will resume next Monday. My name is Kieran O'Neill, and I am joined on the What's the Story podcast this week by Ulster Herald journalist Alan Rogers to talk about the impact of the hearing so far and what we can expect in the next stage of the inquiry. And could you start first by explaining the background to the inquiry?
Well, obviously, as people will know, the Omagh bomb happened on the 15th of August 1998 when 31 people were killed in the atrocity which occurred on Market Street. Now, over the subsequent 25 years, there has been a concerted campaign by very many of the people who were bereaved as a result of the bombing to find out the truth about what happened. And finally then the bombing inquiry was granted by the then Secretary of State, and obviously that has now started. It began with preliminary hearings last July, and then in January, over the course of 14 days, we had personal and commemorative statements as they were described. Now, these included, I suppose, an opportunity for those who were bereaved to give a testimony about their relatives and, their interests and what happened to them on that particular day and how they came to be in Omagh on the 15th of August 1998. Now, those were obviously by their very nature very emotional and very powerful testimonies from the family members of those who were bereaved and took place, as I said, over 14 days. Now, following that, some of the people who were injured on that day and the emergency services who reacted and went to the scene of the explosion, they also provided evidence to the inquiry. So all in all, that was the opening 2 weeks. Now we're going to move on from that now to the opening statements by the core participants. But
Yeah,
so it is moving ahead.
Yeah, and everyone will remember those couple of weeks in January. It was such a testimonies from the victims' families and the survivors. But to get to that stage, as you said, it has been and was such a long process for the families. No one has ever been convicted in connection for the murders. From talking to the families, what do you feel they got out of the hearings in January. Like, you covered them every day. It was tough watching it online, let alone actually being there. But what do you feel the families got from that process?
Well, I think what the families got, and from talking to a number of them, I think they got an opportunity to talk about their relatives who had died, because that was the first time in the course of the past 25 years that really happened. So they got they got the chance to write and say whatever they thought about their their relatives who were killed. They got to present photographs of them. They got to tell their stories, and not only their stories about how they came to be in Omagh on that particular day, but also their backstories, what they were doing in life, what they had done in life, and what they were planning to do in the future. And really, those were at times very harrowing stories, but I think they were therapeutic for people to be able to do that, and feel that they had done justice to the memory of their brothers, sisters, sons, daughters, fathers, mothers who were killed on that terrible day.
It really did make it bring the personal aspect of it. Ourselves as journalists, but people following the horrific story of the Omagh bombing over the years. The victims became pictures in the paper almost. We seen them, but we didn't really know about the people and their stories behind them. But I found that, again, just watching online in January, was so powerful that you're hearing about, as you were saying, about people's lives, what their plans were for the future, the young people, the families talking about what their plans were, and just a lot of it ordinary stuff that we all deal with. But it was powerful to hear those stories coming out, and the survivors also got to talk as well. And I also find it quite touching from the emergency services also got, in some ways they feel they were kind of forgotten about in terms of their stories.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I think all the stories were really, really important to tell. Everybody has a story to tell, and those ones were especially important. And I suppose for those who were injured and those who obviously were the first responders on the scene, they have very distinct memories of what they witnessed and what they encountered on that particular day. And it's hard even thinking back to that now, to for those people. And obviously what happened during those 2 weeks probably brought it all back for the emergency services, not only, and also of course for the families. But I think that was an important thing to do, and it was appropriate that was the first aspect of the inquiry. It matters obviously what happens between now and the inquiry's quest to find out, as the words are, whether the Omagh bomb was preventable or not. But for now, those testimonies about the 31 people who were killed, about all those who were injured, and all those who responded, those stories are there. And because they're there, they're set in stone, so to speak. And like, everybody that was there on that day, everybody in the Omagh community and beyond got the opportunity to tell their story. A lot of them, there were something like 300 people who were injured on that day. Not all of them were at the inquiry during those 2 weeks, but a significant number were there from the from the then RUC, from the Northern Ireland Ambulance Service, from local people who just happened to be on the scene, and they were able to say, certain things struck out for them. And I suppose this isn't the time or the place to go back over those, but I think all that I remember that day, and all that you can sort of say, is that you were glad that you didn't have to experience what they experienced, because it really was horrific.
And you, as a local man, as you say, your own experience and sitting through those testimonies for that couple of weeks in January. That must have been difficult hearing that.
It was. It definitely was difficult. There's no getting away from that. But I suppose the as difficult as it is for and was for people like me who are from the area, that pales into insignificance when you look at how difficult it was at the time and how difficult it has been during the intervening 27 years nearly now for those who lost loved ones and for those who were injured and for those who responded and tried to help as best they can.
So we're now moving into what we could sort of almost term the nitty-gritty of the inquiry. The inquiry was set up in 2024 to look to see if it could have been prevented. The bombing could have been prevented by the state authorities. But an important element of this is the fact that we know the bomb came from the south. It was made in the south, transported across. There was a civil case taken against 5 men, and there was 4 of them that some of the relatives successfully sued. We know they were based in the south. So obviously that cross-border element is key. We know that recently the Irish government says that they've agreed to hand over, or that the inquiry can have access to document or whatever.
Yeah, there was the Omagh Bombing Inquiry legal team and the representatives from the Irish government back a number of weeks ago. I can't remember the exact date. I think it was around the end of March. They signed what was described as a memorandum of understanding, which basically means that if the Omagh Bombing Inquiry requires disclosure on important documents that the Irish government holds, then it's the intention that those will be provided. Now, this was a very important aspect of it for many members of the, what are described as the core participants, because they felt that because of, as you say, because the fact that the bomb was made in the Republic and was driven from the Republic to the north, and then those who drove it to there and left it in Omagh then returned to the Republic, it was felt that the Irish government had a key role then to play in terms of finding out the truth. And I suppose there have been calls for the Irish government to set up their own statutory public inquiry so that they can compel witnesses and compel these documents to be released. Now, for now, everything seems reasonably okay, but a lot of the proof of the pudding in relation to this will be in the eating, and when there are documents that perhaps are seen as sensitive, the question will be, will those be disclosed? So I think this is very much a case of waiting and seeing how things develop, and in relation to that, then back at the end of last month we had 2 what were called procedural hearings, and what they did was various core participants, and I'll come back to this term core participant in a minute, but they got the opportunity to make their submissions into whether their documents that they held should be released in full or redacted. So you had a case where the NIO were saying, well, we had junior civil servants at that time who were involved in in producing documents in relation to the Omagh bomb. We feel that because they were junior staff that their names should be redacted. Then obviously there were people who were charged who were mentioned as potential suspects in the case, whether their names should be redacted as well from disclosure that takes place. Now, ultimately, last week, the chairman of the inquiry, Lord Turnbull, he said, look, that he wouldn't be redacting the names of junior civil servants, but that there would be, if there were particular instances where it was felt that names should be redacted or other information should be redacted, that he would consider those on a case-by-case basis. So that is where we're at now ahead of the June 23 resumption.
So what do we know about what's going to happen next week? when the hearings resume?
Well, basically, the inquiry will be back in Omagh. We haven't had a venue confirmed as yet for those hearings, but they will be the opening statements by the core participants, and I said I would come back to the core participants. The core participants are people who were bereaved or injured in the bombing. You also have the PSNI, our core participants, the government, and that includes the Ministry of Defence. It includes the Northern Ireland office. I think it includes the Foreign Office. So those are all core participants. So what they will do is they will give their opening statements beginning on the 23rd of June. So some of the people, all the families are represented legally in the case, and a lot of them are represented by various legal firms and King's Counsel, and they will make their views known as to, like any legal case, they'll outline their submissions at the start and see how it moves on from there. But I would imagine that they will say, we want certain information, this is why we want it, and this is why it's important.
And have we any idea of timeline in terms of, like, this is going to be the hearings in January were very personal and emotive, whereas I think this stage is we're going to get really bogged down in the minutiae of what happened. Have we any idea of timeline and how long it's going to take?
Well,
this stage?
I don't think we'll get too bogged down in the minutiae of what happened just at this stage. I think what you will have at this stage is you will have very determined statements made by the legal representatives from the families about what they felt happened on that particular day, about why they felt it happened, and about why they see it as important that certain information is released so that they can find answers to what, to the questions and very important questions that they have.
So we're a bit in the dark in terms of how long it's going to take, or even the processes. It comes in stages. So this stage of the inquiry starts next Monday.
Yeah.
Is it going to be, again, we don't know, but is this going to be a fairly short period and then there's another break before we come back again for more evidence? Do you think that's the way it's going to go?
Yeah, that will be the way it will go, because I would imagine that the opening statements of each of the core participants, I counted that there's about 5 legal firms who are representing the families of those bereaved and injured. There then is, as I said, there's the PSNI, our core participants, the NIO. So there's probably somewhere in the region of 10 legal representatives who will be providing their opening statements, and as I say, they will outline what their case is in terms of finding the truth about what happened, which is the stated aim of the inquiry. So I would imagine that'll take around about 2 weeks.
Okay. And then we'll take a break again.
And then there'll be a break again, and then it'll resume, and I think that is when the real, as you say, the nitty gritty and the minutiae of what happened on that particular day, that will be when that will start emerging, and that is the key part of the inquiry, and that will be when it will become so important for the families of those bereaved to see if they are going to get the information and the answers that they have asked, or the questions that they've asked, whether they're going to get those answers.